1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay, whenever ready? Okay, good. A little bit of sun coming in there. Okay, Anne, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Great, okay. Ann Widdecombe, first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to the interview. We're here now, it's Wednesday, the 29th of January 2020. The MEPs will shortly be voting on the Brexit Withdrawal Agreement. How do you feel about leaving the EU, which the UK will do at 11 p.m. on British Irish time?
I'm delighted. I'm elated. But also I'm profoundly relieved, because this has taken a long time getting here. I mean, go back to 2016, we thought it was all over. We'd had the referendum, we'd won. Parliament then voted by a huge majority to implement Article 50. You know, it was all going to be very straightforward. We were going to leave the EU. Here we are, January 2020, and we're now only just leaving. So there is a deep relief that this is over.
Yeah, oh, you want some water, do you? Yeah.
No, I was going for my handkerchief.
Oh, yes, okay. Is that okay?
Seems okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You can just keep it running.
Yeah. All right.
If you like, I can ask you that question again.
No, there's no need.
Okay.
No.
So, a deep relief that it's all over. Have you any sense of regret at all about the fact that the UK is leaving this big bloc?
You must be joking. I have absolutely no regrets at all. Absolutely none. My only regret is that it's taken as long as it has taken.
But why don't you have any regrets?
What am I supposed to regret? Name me one thing that I should regret.
Well, let's say, for example, the fact that you would be part of a big trading bloc. You have free movement of people. You have lots of people who are in the, maybe share cultural issues.
You have just named all the reasons why I want to go. Control of our own borders, control of our own laws, control of our own trade deals. I don't want to be run by this great big bloc, as you call it. That is exactly the problem. It is a great big protectionist bloc. Well, we are the world's 5th largest economy. We're right on their doorstep. We will now start to compete with them.
Just back on freedom of movement, during one of the last plenary sessions in Strasbourg, you spoke very vociferously about the fact that freedom of movement would have to stop. This was during a debate on citizens' rights in a post-Brexit era. Now, MEPs have been concerned about the fact that UK citizens living in the EU post-Brexit or EU citizens living in the UK post-Brexit won't have the kind of rights that perhaps they may have expected.
Right. Well, first of all, Mrs May, never mind Boris, Mrs May offered right at the start of this process, she said, right, let's get the issue of citizens' rights out of the way. We'll agree full rights if you agree full rights. They wouldn't have it. They just wanted to mess about. Well, now it's all coming home to roost. But actually, we have been very clear that EU citizens already living in Britain will have all the necessary rights, providing they apply for them. That is what we've said. They've got to apply to stay, apply for permanent settlement, and that's fine. Then, unless it's fraudulent or something, they will get it. So, and the EU has made similar noises about UK citizens. In the end, before we joined what was then the EEC, which I'm old enough to remember, I and my companions, young people at the time, we travelled, we worked, we studied, we lived in each other's countries. You don't have to belong to this ghastly institution just to be able to do that.
What's so ghastly about the institution of the EU?
Well, how long have you got? The most ghastly thing about it is that it is utterly undemocratic. Secondly, it is trying to become, quite successfully trying to become, a superstate. It wants its own army, its own foreign policy, and any individual member, even a big, thriving, powerful economy like ours, cannot prevail against the institution, let alone the poor little members, countries like Greece, for example, which have had the most hideous time. So everything is wrong with the EU, and it's very undemocratic. This is supposed to be a parliament, and we can't even initiate law.
But what's so democratic about the UK? Because you had millions of people who voted to remain, and now their vote is effectively over.
Yes, because they lost, dear. Millions of people did vote to remain, but millions more people voted to leave. And that is what is called democracy. And it relies on losers' consent, which is to say that if you've lost an election or you've lost a referendum, or you've lost any sort of plebiscite at all, you consent that that is the outcome.
What about the people of Northern Ireland? As you know, a small majority voted to remain, and this has been a huge issue, and of course as well an issue about whether there would be a border on the island of Ireland.
Well, one of the reasons why I do not like Boris's withdrawal agreement is, of course, the border down the Irish Sea, which is going to effectively make Northern Ireland operate differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, I strongly disapprove of that. As far as a border between the two parts of Ireland was concerned, I could wear that much better, providing it wasn't a hard border, because after all, there is a border between Switzerland and the EU, but you'd never know. There's a border between Norway and Sweden, but you'd never know. And it was perfectly possible to have a very, very moderately managed border, because there is a border. I mean, there's a legal border that divides the two countries between the north and the south of Ireland. So I always thought that the fuss about a hard border, which wasn't in prospect, was really a red herring for the Remainers to use.
Well, it wouldn't have been, though, for the government of Ireland. They would have seen that as a very intrusive mechanism. And of course, you can see that the EU worked hard to ensure that there wouldn't be a hard border and that it would affect the freedom of movement, not to mind goods and services between the Republic and Northern Ireland.
Well, at the moment, what we've got is it affecting the free movement of people and services between Northern Ireland and the UK. And that, to my mind, is much more serious because Northern Ireland is part of the UK. Ireland is a separate country. It remains part of the EU. It has a border. I mean, anyone would think the border was suddenly being created. It has already an existing border.
An existing border with who now or what?
Northern Ireland. It's always had a border. There's a legal border there. You can't say, I'm in Northern Ireland if you're in error. There is actually a legal border. There's nothing new about that.
But there's no border there's no border in the sense of checking goods and services or people like there used to be in the past.
There is a border there. All I'm saying is there was no need to turn that into a hard border. That became a red herring. It wasn't in prospect. I've just quoted you the Swiss border, the Norwegian border. It would not be unique. Here is a border between the EU and somebody else. And borders in Scandinavia between their countries. And for heaven's sake, everybody, calm down. But I do object to a border down the Irish Sea.
And what about the trade negotiations now that are going to happen? As you know, of course, your Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is insisting that a deal be done by the end of the year. The EU and indeed Irish officials as well are saying that seems highly unlikely. What's your own take on that?
Well, my answer is very simple, Mr. Varadkar. If it really is so unlikely and it doesn't happen, we'll leave on WTO terms. Now, that should act as an impetus for everybody to really make this happen. It can happen quite easily. After all, we're not starting suddenly from scratch. We've had 3.5 years to think about this, 3.5 years of informal behind-the-scenes talks. So it is not just something that's suddenly coming in a very truncated timetable. But my line would be, of course I want a trade deal, of course I want it all to work out. But if it doesn't, we'll leave on WTO terms. We're the world's 5th largest economy. We can compete, we can manage, we can stand on our own 2 feet.
Do you really think that, though?
Yes, of course I do. I wouldn't say it if I didn't.
And what happens if there isn't a trade agreement agreed between the bloc and the UK by the end of December 2020?
Well, we can leave. I've just said we can leave on WTO terms, and that is what we should do.
And do you think that will happen? Do you think at the end of the day Boris Johnson would really do that?
That is a very big question. I don't trust Boris. He said, knowing very well that he could not deliver it, that he was going to leave do or die on the 31st of October. He knew he could not deliver that because of the parliamentary lack of a majority at the time. He knew he couldn't do it, but he went on saying he could. So when he says that we're going to leave on the 31st of December, well, we're going to leave the trade negotiations on the 31st of December, deal or no deal, do I believe it? Not necessarily.
But you don't necessarily trust him on what he's saying.
I don't trust Boris at all. Why should I? I mean, where's the precedent for trusting what he says?
And when you look back, you've had a very lengthy career in British politics. You're very senior at one stage in the British Tory party. Now you're a member of the Brexit Party. What, as you look back on your career, would you have considered to be the biggest highlight? Is it the more recent years and your involvement in Brexit and leaving the EU, or your earlier days?
Oh, I mean, there are various things that I've done and been involved in that I'm very proud of, but probably nothing quite so much as bringing Brexit home.
And you are going to lead a party now here on Friday, I gather. Are you some kind of event that the Brexit Party is staging? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Richard and Nigel will already be back in the UK because of the big events on Friday night, which they have to prepare for. So that leaves Muggins here to do the honours on Friday morning. And I can't tell you anything about it for the genuine reason that I don't yet have all the detail. If I did, I'd share it with you, but I don't. But let's just say we will be leaving the EU on Friday, and we will make it very clear that we are delighted to be going home on Friday morning. That's when we'll go home.
You won't regret leaving Brussels?
You are joking, aren't you?
Was there anything you liked about it?
Nothing about Brussels. I did like Strasbourg, not as an institution, I hated that. But I liked Strasbourg as a city. I stayed in a lovely little quaint hotel all the time I was there. I liked the Christmas markets, I liked the cathedral. There was character to Strasbourg. But did I want to be there as a member of the EU Parliament? No, I certainly didn't.
So you'll be celebrating, presumably, on Friday?
Oh, celebrating. I should be ecstatic. I should be wild.
And just before we go, Anne, were you always sceptical about the EU?
Yes, but it's grown. I was certainly never as sceptical as I am now. And the period when it hardened was when, and you've already referred to it, I was a government minister, and I was minister throughout the entire major administration, so it was nearly 7 years, and in 3 different departments. And I came to realise that we really no longer governed ourselves, that everything we had to do had to be certified as compatible with EU law, that if the EU issued a directive, we had to obey it, whether we wanted to or not. And gradually, throughout that time, my attitude towards Europe certainly hardened.
OK, Ann Widdecombe, thank you very much.
Thank you.